Welcome, everyone, to Beyond Surviving, the safe space for survivors of childhood sexual abuse to receive support, resources, and share their stories. Beyond Surviving is about freedom, healing, connection, and even laughter and fun. Most importantly, it's about letting go of the pain of abuse and finally moving on. I'm Rachel Grant, and for those of you who don't yet know me, I've been a sexual abuse recovery coach since 2007 and am the author of Beyond Surviving, the final stage of recovery from sexual abuse. You can learn more about me and the Beyond Surviving program at rachelgrantcoaching.com. Now, one of the things that you all know that I love to do is bring world changers onto this show. People who are really out there doing amazing work and taking up a lot of space and making sure that this conversation about healing from sexual abuse continues to be in view. And so I am very excited to have such a woman with us today, Nichole Mullen. And she's going to be sharing with us a simple guide to healing for survivors of childhood sexual abuse. So, to tell you a little more about Nichole, she is a 7-time sexual assault survivor, beginning in early childhood. She emerged more resilient than she could have imagined by diving into a mindful healing process, which we're going to certainly talk more about today. And through her journey of healing, she's become a yoga teacher, mindfulness teacher, and motivational speaker to teach others how to create a thriving future for themselves. It's her life's purpose to help those with a chaotic mind, boy, we know something about that, don't we, folks, to find peace and obtain bliss. Yes, Nichole, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you for having me. I'm so super excited to be a part of your show, and I just can't wait to talk more about everything.
Yes, for sure. So let's get right to it. I want to first of all just explore, some of the challenges that you've personally faced. It's, looking at a history of childhood abuse that is, involves so many layers of sexual assault. I can imagine that you've had a few obstacles to overcome in your journey. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about, those challenges and what life really was like for you, and then of course, importantly, we're going to talk as well about how you overcame those struggles.
Absolutely. I'll kind of get back to the beginning. So my first assault was actually by my grandfather. So it was incest, which was pretty traumatic and difficult. Any sexual abuse is definitely traumatic. So, but that was from an early age of, I say 9, but really it was right before my ninth birthday. So I kind of always took that part more intensely than my other sexual assaults. That was not my first one. I actually experienced several more, as you know, by the number 7 throughout my lifetime from people I had encountered throughout my journey. So, with my grandfather, there came the issue of trust was such a huge problem that I kind of ran into throughout my life. Also, being sexualized at a very young age was another major problem, which kind of turned into having complicated relationships with other people throughout my adult life. So one of my biggest things that I will say that I've struggled with is self-sabotage, which I think like any other, whether you had a traumatic experience or just other mental health issues, you kind of face self-sabotage as a struggle throughout your lifetime. And it's a constant process of checking in. So I started my healing process actually with my husband. Now when we were dating, he kind of brought to surface some things that we had encountered throughout our relationship. And I wasn't ready to face my struggles. I really didn't think I had that big of a problem. I just kind of tried to shove
Mm,
it down.
mhm.
And then I went on Google, and like I say in my TED talk, I searched for an advocate in my area because I just felt like I should. So when I met with the advocate, which was incredible because she put me with a therapist, and I had been looking for a therapist for quite some time, but none of them kind of felt right. And
Yeah,
that's one thing I will say is you have to find a therapist that you feel 100% comfortable with you.
for
Um,
sure.
so when I found mine, it took me 8 years, 8 years of recovery, 8 years of showing up and going through the therapy sessions, 8 years of doing the EMDR and the exercises, and 8 years of practicing my tools that I had, to recover from my triggers. And so it definitely was, it was very challenging, and I never would wish that on anyone else. Now, one thing I always say is I swear the healing was worse than actual assault, because I had to dive
Mm.
into every single crevice that I was trying to hide and bury
Oh,
down.
sure.
But it was totally worth it. So I had to learn the importance of checking in with myself and being kind to myself. And, self care is so crucial. So I teach that to everyone I can possibly meet and talk to.
Mhm.
um, and, just by going back in and digging into my tool bag whenever I would relapse or have a trigger, it has been my saving grace. So,
Yeah. Thanks, Nicole. Just hearing a little bit of your story and your journey, I think, certainly a piece that I identify with is that time in the process when you're trying to like pretend that everything is okay. Like, I don't want to look at this, I don't want to deal with it. Sure. And
absolutely.
oftentimes it is a person in our lives who kind of sees us suffering and sees what's going on for us that reflects for us, hey, there might be something we're here and worth looking at, that gives us that little nudge to and encourage and support to find it in ourselves to take a look at what is very hard, to take a look at. I totally hear you when you're talking about this feeling of, my gosh, these experiences were difficult, but the process of working through that can have so many different layers and can be really taxing. And I know for a lot of my clients, and certainly I felt this way too, there's also sometimes this feeling of like, this isn't fucking fair, right? Like, I am the
Absolutely,
one
all
who is
the
hard.
time.
Right? And I've got to do this work. And I'm the one who's sitting here still unraveling it all and putting in the time and the money and the energy. Um, and so, all of those elements, come into play in a process of healing.
Yeah, anger and
Mhm.
grief and frustration. It's like you're just beating your head against the wall and trying to find a solution, but you have to break past those points. So,
Yeah. And you mentioned a couple of different modalities that were helpful to you. So, like EMDR and working with a therapist who you really liked and trusted. And I know that mindfulness is also a key piece. I'm sure in your work walk in yoga, this has really come in, more into your view. And so let's start off with just your definition of mindfulness. What does that word even mean or represent to you personally?
right. So mindfulness to me is turning inward to check in with yourself. So for me, mindfulness is if I am, say, at a restaurant and I'm getting frustrated at, maybe my food came back a couple times, then I am going to ask myself a series of questions. I always say it's self-investigation is what I call it, because it's like you're
Mm,
investigating your own mind and trying to
yeah.
figure out how you operate. And so, if, for instance, if my tacos had something on it I didn't want, then I'm going to be like, why am I even upset about this? Like, what? I'll call out the emotions.
Hmm.
And then once I know, like, okay, I'm frustrated, I'm angry that the server, maybe this is the third time it's come back or something, and I'm hungry at the same time. So
Right.
I have to be kind and humble to myself. So I
Mhm.
call out the emotions, and then I just kind of sit with that for a minute and I let it soak in, and I take deep breaths. So that's an example of like how I would practice mindfulness on the regular, is turning inward, asking myself questions to try to figure out where my mindset's at, and also like try to give myself the patience and the permission to get past it.
Mm,
I think when we're in such a fast-paced world, we encounter so many different difficulties throughout our daily lives, whether it is a trigger from our sexual assault that we had experienced in the past, or maybe it's just something with work that we're upset about, or we have too much on our plate.
yeah.
Then I definitely think just being patient with ourselves and taking one thing at a time, and knowing that the rest will come, but honoring where we are at that moment. So, with every single trigger, what I had to do during my recovery process, because I want it to be healed. I was
Mm,
like ready for everything to be done. Like you said, like, why do I have to deal with this? Why am I the one having to do all the work when I didn't commit the crime? And we want to be, I want it to be an adult, and I wanted to get past it and start my life.
mm,
And so I had to start pausing and accepting that, okay, well, maybe I want to be well into my career or in a happy relationship, but instead I'm in therapy sessions twice a week. then I would just be like, okay, well, this is where I'm at. This is me now.
Love
So
that.
my now became, breathing through a trigger, journaling, you know,
Mm,
taking the time and the care I needed. Maybe that means taking 10 steps backwards, 1 week or 1 month, or if knowing that I'm burnt out over certain therapy sessions and I need to take 2 months off.
mhm.
And so that's what I do. That's mindfulness to me, is just being kind and humble to yourself and patient and forgiving. Oh, also forgiving. And just
Yes.
know that you are now where you are now. You're not in the past, you're not in the present. And just do what you need to get through the moment you're in.
Mhm. Thanks for sharing that, Nicole. You know what stands out to me? Two things really kind of come forward from what you shared there for me. So, first, this idea of self-awareness and looking inward and beginning to get curious about the way that we are interpreting the world around us and the way that we're responding, the way that we're thinking through a situation or thinking about ourselves. I think for a lot of survivors, myself included, was this time in my life where I was just kind of on autopilot. All of the belief systems and all of the reactions and behaviors that had been born out of this experience of trauma were just very automatic. I wasn't thinking about it, it just was there and in the process. And in many ways, I felt at the mercy of that, like I didn't have any say about it.
Hmm.
And so, one of the things that we can certainly do through mindfulness and building our toolkit and the process of healing, I believe, is to start paying attention and noticing what is actually going on, and also beginning to understand the amount of kind of authority and choice that we have in those moments to respond and to take care of ourselves. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
No, sorry. What I was going to say is, I think it takes a lot to be able to notice when that moment comes on too,
Hmm.
like you said, we have authority of ourselves. We have authority of our mind and our lives and what takes place. And so when the trigger or something we're experiencing comes up, sometimes it's very easy to let it overwhelm you. And then it kind of ruins that day or ruins that week and puts you in a funky mindset.
Mm,
But the important thing is knowing that, hey, you can pause it if you want to,
yeah, that's
and
right.
say, I'm going to come back to this thought in an hour from now,
Oh,
and
I love
and
that.
dive into it when I'm in a safe place.
Mm,
And like I said, just give yourself that permission. I completely agree with you. Like, we are the authority of our space, of our mind, and knowing what comes up.
yeah. That's beautiful. I love this idea of like, hey, I can put a pin in this. I don't have to process it or deal with it right this second. I can wait. I can come back to it later. That's
Right?
really powerful. Yeah, I dig that so much.
Right.
The other thing that really stood out to me from what you shared is this idea of self acceptance and accepting the situation as it is, while you're still continuing to strive for what's next, continuing to move forward, but just appreciating, look, this is where I am today. This is the work that I need to do. This is what's on my plate and what's in front of me. And some days I might be okay with that. And some days I might be pissed off about that. And some days I might need to take a total break from it. I call those recovery timeouts.
Wow,
So,
I like that.
yeah, we need that because if every day is about internal investigation and practicing tools, like we're actually, missing out on living. And I think we want to strive as much as we can to live even while we're in that place of recovery and exploring and investigation. So I love kind of the frame that you're bringing to that process of acceptance and patience and forgiveness. It's really powerful. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hmm. So let's explore a little more deeply this idea of self investigation. You've already given us a few little nuggets of kind of how you might do that over your tacos, which I can feel you on that. I mean, hangry, give me my tacos. But let's explore that. What are some, maybe we can give our listeners some really specific examples so that the next time they're having a moment, they have some specific questions or tools that they can use along those lines of self investigation.
Right. So, for an example, is one of my biggest triggers now towards, they say I'm in post traumatic growth, is where I'm at now with my recovery process. But I do see little like pockets where the PTSD kind of starts to come back, and I feel like I'm relapsing a little bit. And I noticed that mostly whenever I'm watching movies, and I know a lot of survivors can kind of feel me on this for a
Yeah.
trigger. but you're watching a movie and then there's always a sexual assault in every single movie, I feel like.
Mm,
That will just totally put me in a funk and set me back. But it's really difficult because what if you're at the movies with, a friend, or and you have this night planned, or what if it's your birthday and you didn't plan on having this type of trigger? So for me, it was so it was so hard in the beginning because it would set me off, right? And then I had to, take a time out. So I would either excuse myself to go to the restroom,
mm,
or I would just, like, now I'm more comfortable with my husband, since the beginning of my recovery process. So now I'm just like, hey, I need a timeout of 15 minutes. So what I do is I excuse myself and I go and I create a safe place in my mind. I use some visualization. I know that it's just me. So my kind of safe thing is I'll either put a hoodie over my head, makes me feel closed in. It's nice.
yeah,
But also
nice.
too, and maybe you're in a public place and you go to the restroom. But what I do, I just want to check in with myself. So I ask myself, what in the movie had the sexual assault? What about it was specific to my sexual assault? So what about it had made me feel as triggered as I did? Because we all know some triggers can be small and some can be bigger. If we haven't healed through all of them, they might feel more intense than the ones we've done some work on. So I will pull out the similarities, and it's very hard. Sometimes it can be painful. And then I'll ask, okay, well, you know, what about it? What emotions did I feel about it? So now I know the specifics of the triggers, and now I know the emotions that had came up. And then why is it that the emotions made me feel the way that it did? How can I proceed, like, away from them so that I don't feel as triggered next time?
Mm,
So I'll think about that, and so I'll allow those to kind of boil up in me, and I'll take a few deep breaths, because it's once I believe that once you create an understanding for why you feel the way that you feel, that you can kind of heal past stuff. I kind of learned it. Um,
mhm,
it's similar to the EMDR. I don't know if you've ever practiced that, but what it would be is you pull up the emotion when you're in a painful experience, like when you're remembering a painful experience, and then the therapist calls out an emotion, but it kind of puts a stop in your tracks, so that then you just kind of sit and think on it for a little bit. So
mhm,
it's like once you remove yourself from that memory and you detach yourself, and you can understand that you're not physically in it anymore. Because I know with PTSD, what it is you feel like your mind and your body, you
right.
tense up and you feel like you're there again. So it's like you detach yourself, so you're in a safe
Mm,
place to evaluate your emotions and the pain that you're experiencing at that time. So just create the detachment, ask yourself some questions. How is it affecting me? Why is it affecting me this much? How can I move forward? And then take a few deep breaths. And what we say with energy in our bodies and our mind is, when you feel that that sigh of relief from
mhm,
taking a set amount of deep breaths, whether it's 10 or 20, but making sure you get that breath fully, that is the energy passing away from your body. It's
right.
releasing out of the point that it was in. So that's what I do. I just ask myself a series of questions, and then I allow the memory to just kind of release itself out of me. And then, after doing this a handful of times, it's very effective. For me, it's one of my tools, and I'm able to not feel as intense when that experience kind of comes forward again, another trigger.
Right. Yes. Oh my gosh. So rich and so wonderful what you've shared with us there. One thing that I really love about this particular practice is stepping away. I know so many survivors, they start to feel something and then they just kind of white knuckle it. Like, I don't want to make a scene. I don't want to da 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 da, like all of that stuff. But really giving yourself first and foremost that permission to step away from the situation. Everybody needs to go to the bathroom. It's a great one to use, you
Yeah.
know, and or step outside, and if you do have somebody that you're more connected with or trusting to say, like, hey, something's coming up, I need to go take some time. The other thing that really stood out to me from what you shared is in this moment of feeling triggered, a lot of us will go to the place of what's wrong with me? This shouldn't be happening again. Oh my gosh, this is terrible. And we go right into that place of shame and blame and making ourselves bad and wrong because we're having a response and reaction. And I love that's what you're offering here as an alternative, which is so powerful, which is instead of doing that, to just sit with it, get curious about it, look at it, break it down into its parts, and bring some love and acceptance, there, along with that breathing. Yeah, really beautiful. Now,
Thanks.
Nicole, yeah, I know another big piece of your work and something that's really important to you is self-care. And I know for a lot of people these days, self-care has become this woo thing, right? And it's like, oh, everybody talks about self-care. What does it even really mean now? And then also, a lot of people are in this space of, I don't have time. I don't have time. I don't have time. I don't have time. And I wonder if you could break down for us a little bit about, like, maybe share some of your self-care practices, how you make it doable, how you weave that in, and why you think that's such a key piece for healing.
Right. So I think self care, whether it's internal or external, is one of the most crucial things you can do for your healing process. If you can't be able to add a couple self care things into your routine daily for yourself, then it's going to make healing and your recovery process a lot more intense than it should be, or than you would want it to be, I should say. So for me, I noticed that whenever I'm a mom, I'm a student, I work full time, I have my
Whoop,
blog, I'm a yoga teacher and I'm about to open a yoga studio. I just have way too much on my plate
man, girl.
that I don't know how to
Yes.
stop. It's probably a problem. But what I do when I start to feel like really stressed out, it's okay. Well, what haven't I been doing lately that I know makes me feel
Mhm,
good? Have I
mhm.
been drinking enough water? Have I been making sure that I eat? Because I can make sure everyone else in my family eats. I make dinner and everything. But
Yeah.
am I feeding myself the type of foods I enjoy? Are they healthy? Do they fuel me? Am I going on walks regularly? I like to go on walks. So I kind of just like say, okay, well, I feel out of whack and I'm all over the place. So here's my Mary Poppins self care bag. What am I going to dig out and pull out to help me?
I love that.
Yeah, so I really think that's the most important part of our recovery process, is
Mhm.
learning how to care for yourself. And, I was actually recently ran into an old friend that is a sexual assault survivor, and she was having a hard time and with being comfortable with her body, because a lot of times we can feel like our body's not ours.
Sure.
And one of the things I told her is, why don't you take a nice shower and lock your bathroom door? And you're in a safe place. And then when you get out of the shower and you get dressed, I want you to take the lotion and just rub lotion on your arms and your hands and take time really putting it on. Don't rush through it and know that it's your hands touching your hands and
Mhm.
rubbing the lotion on, and taking that type of self-care, and taking the time is self-care, taking the time to give ourselves what we need and deserve. So I really think that is like the most crucial part. So whether it's like a tiny minute of maybe you read one page in a book today, and that's something you enjoy. And maybe next week you read 3 chapters. You just have to find where it fits in your schedule
Yeah.
and make sure that you make time for it, because no one else is going to make time for it. So I tell people to pencil yourself in.
Yes. Yeah, and the levels of healing that we're working on when we do these little self-care practices run very deep because it is about connecting back with ourselves. It is about prioritizing ourselves, honoring ourselves, and all of those different levels. And, I think self care can take anywhere from 30 seconds to hours. And what I've noticed in my own journey is when I take those 30 seconds, that it actually fundamentally changes the rest of my day. Just 30 seconds of being and doing something for myself at the end of the day, taking 30 seconds to do a little self-nurturing practice. So it doesn't have to take a long time, but it really has so many benefits that you might not eat. A lot of people, oh, if I can't do like an hour, then it doesn't matter. And I guess what we're both offering here today is like that's not true. Any moment of
Wow.
self-care is a powerful practice and makes a big difference in how you feel and in your day-to-day. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Like however you can get it, take it. you
Yes.
You write yourself a note and put it in your lunch for
Yeah.
work. Write yourself a love note and put it in lunch. Uh,
Yeah.
like we give it to people all the time so easily. And
Mm-hmm.
the question for you is like, how many things do you do a day for other people, whether it's a stranger or work related or family related, that something they could be doing themselves where you could be utilizing that time for you?
Yeah. That's
So I think
wonderful.
it's really important to kind of look through our daily routines. And if we say that we don't have time for self care, well, if we don't have time for self care, we don't have self love. Because
Mhm.
I feel like it's the core to self love is taking care of ourselves. We're the most important person because without caring for ourselves, we can't care for anyone else. It's kind of like that airplane, example
Analogy, right.
where your mouth.
That's right, that's right.
And
Yeah.
so go through your day, comb through it, and like with a fine comb, and see where you can take a minute here, 2 minutes there, you know.
Mhm.
So
Absolutely. So I hope you all are feeling encouraged today who are listening to find some little ways in which you can practice more self care because you are going to be generating self love, deservingness, all sorts of things as a result of that. Now, one of the other things that I wanted to explore with you today, when you share your story and, this process of healing that you went through, over the course of 8 years. And I would say, something similar for me. From the moment when I said, yes, I'm going to look at this, I'm going to deal with this, it was probably like my early 20s. And it wasn't until kind of like my mid 20s, early 30s when things started to really click into place. So this can be a journey, and we bump up against things in that process. We have lots of successes and moments of like freedom and insights and like, whoa, okay, awesome. That feels like that's changing and evolving. But we can also hit roadblocks, moments in that journey when we're feeling like this isn't working, nothing's changing, what's going on here? And I'm wondering if you have any words of encouragement or insights or things that you did yourself personally when you hit those moments that helped you keep going.
right. So my biggest thing is, and this started from a really young age, is I used to sit and just think about who I would be one day. Granted, who I pictured is totally different than who I am now, but that's okay. I love my life, I wouldn't change any of it. But I would sit down and I would picture myself, as an adult after college, what career I would be having, what would I do in my free time in my own living room,
Yeah.
and I would plan out all these details and I would get so fixated on it. And then, anytime I was stressed out, yeah, as a child, I would kind of go back to this place of imagination and visualization. And then now, like years later as an adult, I still hit roadblocks. I hit roadblocks all the time. I make a joke in my TEDx talk. If you've failed a class 10 times, you got to get past it somehow. You can't just give up. I actually, in college, I couldn't pass a class and I took it 5 times. And eventually I just took the placement test all over again, and I had got to pass the class. I didn't even
Oh,
have to
nice.
take it. I just kind of got to pass it.
You found another route.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so it's
good.
all improvising, and it's all
Yeah.
patience and going through stuff. So yeah,
Mm,
I would create this future self, and I would remember her all the time. I didn't want to be sad and stuck in a place forever in my life. My perpetrators, they don't deserve that. What I deserve is I deserve
yeah.
happiness and to be an exceptional woman. And my perpetrators cannot take that from me, and they never ever will. And I will not give them that service, whether
Mhm.
they're dead or alive. It's my time. This is my life, and I'll do the work. I'll show up, and then when I need to, and I hit those roadblocks, I'll hop into my Mary Poppins bag, and I'll move forward.
Yeah. Thanks, Nicole. Man, such a word of encouragement because, our lives have been impacted by the abuse that we've experienced, but it's still our life. And
Absolutely.
we get to create it and we get to take ownership of that. And when we can stay in that place of vision of what we really want and to keep stepping a little bit each day. And when we hit a roadblock, maybe there's a detour, maybe there's a way around it, find a different path and keep coming back to realizing that I think that was a really strong motivation for me in my own journey. I just did not want my grandfather and the other people who had abused me along the way to win. Yeah, I just wanted to take all of that back and own and reclaim my life and be able to say that, you impacted my life and you caused a detour for a while, but I came back to me and I came back to home at the end of the day.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you own your life, no one else.
Yeah. So, Nicole, tell us a little bit about how people can get to know you better. How can they connect with you? What sorts of things are you offering? What sorts of work are you doing these days with survivors?
Of course, yeah. So I actually, you can get in contact with me by, you can email me at info@nicholemullen.com, and my name is spelt with an H, so it's NicholeMullen.com. Or you can go on my website, nicholemullen.com as well. I also have a TEDx talk. It is called Becoming Resilient Through Self-Love. And so you
Hmm.
can always check that out. I do a workshop called The Hurting, the Healing, the Whole a few times a year. I also teach at local yoga studios, and I'm going to start in the Hillsborough County, because I live in Tampa, a jail system for inmates actually doing it. So that's my next step.
Wow.
So, but you can go on my website and you can book the workshop through that for me. I change my dates frequently, and it's very interactive. We do some journaling, some different listening exercises to ourselves, some, I teach you different visualization meditations, and we do a whole section on patience. So, you
Nice.
know, it is definitely, it's very, very filled with information, and I try to make it to where you can have a self-care plan when you leave. So it's internal and external self-care I teach.
Nice. Nicole, that's awesome. So I love this TED Talk. I really encourage everybody listening to go and check it out. I will link to that TED Talk here in our show notes. I'll also link to Nicole's email and website so you can follow up with her and stay in touch. So, Nicole, any final words of wisdom for our listeners today?
Yes, don't give up on yourselves. You matter. You are incredible. You're an exceptional human being. And God, or whoever you believe that made this beautiful universe, put you here for a reason. And don't let the people hurt you keep you down. You deserve to be up.
Yes, cheers to that. I second, I second, I second. So, Nicole, it's been such a joy to have you here as my guest today. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you,
being here.
Rachel.
You're welcome. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in and joining us today. Don't forget to visit rachelgrantcoaching.com to learn more about sexual abuse recovery coaching and explore the other resources that are available on the site. And please be sure to subscribe to the podcast, leave us a note, and come back next month because we have so much more to share. Until then, take good care of you.